Alright Gadgeteers, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about some of the tweaks and changes I've made, mostly in KDE Plasma, but one or two in Fedora. And I'm going to go through all of the different settings and changes that I've made. Now, if you know me, you know that usually, at least lately anyway, I've decided not to bother doing too many tweaks, because the more tweaks that you do, the more you have to fix when there's an issue or you decide to install a new version of Linux. You have to go through and redo all those tweaks. But there are a couple that I've found myself doing on a regular basis just to make things a little bit better in Linux, and I want to show you what those are. So the first one I'm going to start with is actually a bug. So there is a service called IIO-sensor-proxy, and what that service is for those laptops that have built-in sensors for movement and positioning. And unfortunately, it's not working right at the moment in Fedora 26. I did have a temporary fix where I locked the screen rotation function while I was in GNOME, but I am primarily a KDE user, so there was a fix I decided to try, and it's something that I thought, well, if it works, cool. If it doesn't, then I'll just keep using GNOME, or GNOME as it really is said. So the trick here is we have a problem with the IIO sensor, and I'll do a systemctl status IIO, oops, that's an actual O dash sensor dash proxy. Now this is actually a service. You can put the dot service on the end, but you don't have to. Okay, so I have actually masked this particular service. Now normally what you could do for a service is systemctl disable IIO sensor proxy, and this would disable the service from starting up, much like a Windows service. The problem is it didn't actually work, so what I had to do is take it the next step and mask it and put in IIO sensor proxy. Now if I ever want to unmask the service at some point, if they get IIO sensors working correctly so that if I rotate my laptop it will correctly show the display, I can do an unmask IIO sensor proxy service, and that would simply change the masked status to unmasked, and then it would run at startup. What does that mean for me right now? Well, since the service is dead or inactive and it's masked, I do not have the benefit of automatic rotation, but that's okay, because with that bug, what happens is the minute the computer boots up into Linux, the screen rotates upside down. Now with KDE, not only does it rotate upside down, but the coordinates for everything on the screen are as if the screen was not rotated. So everything's upside down, but you still have to click opposite of everything to get it to actually work correctly. It's really, really bizarre. So a simple fix, again, system CTL mask IIO sensor proxy, and that will ensure that you no longer have that problem with your screen rotating automatically the wrong way. So that's the only thing we're going to do in the command line. I know many people are not interested in the command line, so we'll get rid of that. Now I've done quite a bit of changes normally, and I'll just bring up a screen here. I just stick with the default widget set that comes up when you install Fedora, whichever flavor it is. But I've done a couple of tweaks here I thought I would go through and let you see what I've done. And this is some recent stuff that I decided to do. For one thing, I decided that I wanted to change the widgets and go for a slightly different style on my widgets. So if you go into application style and window decorations, as they're called, not really widgets, I actually installed Air Oxygen. Now I have a whole bunch of different ones here. I believe the default is Breeze, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, and quite frankly, if I ever do another install, I might just leave it. I had one here that looks kind of like Mac OS, and I toyed around with that, but I thought I don't want to make it Mac OS. We had an older version, Glow Glass Cupertino, which I thought kind of looked pretty cool because it reminded me of some of the older, like Mavericks OS 10 versions, and of course the original Oxygen and Plastic, which I actually didn't like very much, so I don't use that one. So I stuck with Air Oxygen. The next thing that I did was in Workspace theme. I went ahead and changed the, or actually, no, I didn't change it. I think this might be the default. I was thinking I did, but I think Breeze is the default, so I just left it. I believe if you're using GNOME, Adwaita is the default. So, all right, going back here in power settings, we'll go into power management. Now here's the thing, I always wondered, okay, how come when I do the settings here, some of them do not take effect for locking the screen? I couldn't figure out where it was, and we'll go through that in a minute, but I did change on AC power. We're going to dim the screen after 5 minutes. Now you can't really see everything here because I've got the font larger, but the screen will actually switch off after 20 minutes. And then we'll do a suspend after 30 minutes on AC power. And on battery, it's a little bit more drastic. So dimming the screen after 2, switch it off after 10, and then still suspend after 20. Okay, so there was a couple more settings, though, in specific. When does the screen get locked? That was kind of driving me crazy. So that's actually in desktop behavior. If you go down to screen locking, you can set when the screen will automatically lock, and after the screen locks, at what point should we require the password. Now I set it for 25 seconds, but I think by default this one was like 5 minutes, so it was locking much faster than the screen was dimming or turning off. And I like to have it available a little bit longer. And of course, I did check the option to lock the screen on resume because I do want my computer to be locked if I step away and the screen goes ahead and locks. So I wanted to request the password on resume. The other thing I did in desktop effects, no, I take that back, was in virtual desktops. I actually added 4 virtual desktops. I really do like having 4. Of course, you can see them all right down here. So if I switch now back and forth, you'll see them slide in and out. So I've got 4 that I use, and it really does come in handy for me. I don't know what you think about virtual desktops, but I love it. A while back, years ago, when I was working as a systems analyst, I actually had 2 large 1080p screens, and I had 4 virtual desktops on each screen, and I used every one of those. I had so many command lines open and various other applications. I also had a virtual machine for Windows. It definitely was worth having, but just the virtual desktops alone are a wonderful feature for me, so I use those quite frequently. All right. One of the other things I like to do, and there's different ways you can get to it. If you right click the speaker and go to audio volume settings, one of the things that I did, and this is because of probably I would say the Yoga 910, for whatever reason, if the maximum volume is 100%, it really doesn't get as loud as it's capable of getting. So the Yoga 910 in Windows is much louder. So I changed the maximum volume to 150%. So when I'm playing something, it's nice and robust and I can hear it fine, and it's not overdriving the speakers on this Yoga 910 by a long shot. So things work really well. One of the bummers that I don't like is when you plug in a microphone into the headset jack, it doesn't automatically switch over. I'm sure I could find somewhere where that behavior is changed, and I'll look into that. But as it is right now, it doesn't switch over. So I'm using the headset microphone right now to record everything. You may notice some clipping on the fonts here. The reason for that is I do have the fonts increased quite a bit, and the reason is this is a 4K display. Even though I'm recording in 1080p using OBS, it actually is a 4K display, so the fonts have to get pretty decent size in order to be able to read and see everything. I probably could go a little bit smaller, but as it is right now, it's just easiest for me to read. So when I have those few strange spaces where I can't quite read everything, I pretty much know what to expect there, so it's easy for me to read. Talking about the interface, now I've had a couple people say, wow, basically your desktop setup looks like Microsoft Vista, and I kind of chuckle at that. And yeah, GNOME has a newer kind of interface look, and it's nice, and I do like it, and you can use it with the touchscreen to some effect. But I've actually tried, I don't know how many of you have tried to use GNOME with a 3X with a touchscreen, and personally it doesn't work as well as I would have hoped. I have problems getting it to respond. It may open the wrong setting, you know, because I fat fingered it or whatever. So although they're trying to make it a kind of tablet-like interface or a phone interface, if you will, it doesn't quite get there. So it's still mouse-centric. So why then do I use KDE Plasma? Well, the bottom line is, and the real reason is because when I do my editing, I am using KDE. And let me open it up here real quick. There's so many advanced features in KDE as an editor that I can make use of, and one of them that I really like, when I go to render something, now this is the default, so I've made a template and made a lot of changes, but I was rendering in MP4 H.264 format, but lately ultra high definition was added. I'm not sure how long it's been there, to be truthful, but I started doing some rendering with H.265, or also known as HEVC, and it's astonishing the compression levels that I get. So I'm going to give you an example here. We'll go ahead and minimize that, and we will bring up the Dolphin Explorer. So here are two videos as an example I just rendered yesterday just to do some testing so I could show you. The H.264 version of this video, which I believe is like, I think it's about 8 minutes long, came out as 1.2 gigabytes, and the H.265 version came out as 212 megabytes. Now, for those of you who have super awesome fast internet connections, you're probably saying that doesn't mean anything, that's no big deal. Well, I have a 25 megabit down, and I believe they cap me at something like 6 megabits up. And what's really strange is when I do go ahead and upload files to YouTube, and this is a relatively trivial one. If you look at this one down here, 3.4 gigabytes. So let's say I upload that file. Well, it could take as much as 2 to 3 hours, and The bad part is when it's uploading, for whatever reason, my upstream gets completely, well, I mean, it makes sense. The up channel gets completely overloaded, and if I'm watching Netflix or anything, it blurs to the lowest possible setting. So I'm looking at, if I'm lucky, 360p, you know, and it's just horrible looking. But I got a really good deal. I get the 25 megabits for $30 a month. Everybody could be watching a stream and it's perfectly fine because it's downloading, but something about the upload, which usually you're sending acknowledgement packets and things like that. So I was a little bit surprised that it had that behavior, but I think that is, of course, what is desired by Comcast because they don't really want people uploading. I'm not sure why. I think if you have 25 megabits, you should be able to do what you want. I think part of it is their concern that your computer could be compromised by a virus or an IoT device, and that you might have on your network and end up being used in attacks. And their thinking is, well, if we have an asynchronous connection for this user and we limit their upstream, which normally they don't need anyway, to 6 megabits, they'll be fine. Now I could get a business account and all that and pay $200 or $300 a month, but really not worth it for me. So using H.265, it really compresses the file much smaller, even though it's still just 1080p. And the upload process is just so much easier and so much quicker for me. It just seems to work out really well, and I don't really see a detriment to the quality of the video, so I'm really happy. And again, what I do like is I can actually render it direct from my editor into using H.265 on my Linux. On my Macs, I'm using iMovie, so I haven't been able to afford Final Cut Pro. It's one of my future purchases, I think, but I don't know that I'll ever use it. You know, I'm not doing that high-end stuff that many of the YouTubers are doing, so I don't know that I would ever use all the features that are available on Final Cut Pro. But the one thing iMovie can't do is output using H.265, so right now it's 264. What's the answer to that? Well, I could use Handbrake, but the problem with Handbrake is, although it does a great job compressing it, you got to remember I've got to render it once and then render it twice, which reduces the overall quality of the video. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is, for whatever reason, Handbrake on my Mac, for the most part, is very inefficient. I did a render of a 7-minute video, and I was actually doing a 4K video, and it was 30 gigabytes. That's why it took so long. So yeah, I think Handbrake doing a 1080p video would actually be much faster. Now I remember. It's the one video that I released that was a 4K, and I'm sure you've seen it. It's the one talking about the MacBook and MacBook Pro keyboard issues. This one right here is actually in 4K, so it was 7 minutes, but it was a 4K video that I went super high definition, everything 4K, and it was 30 gigabytes, and then I had to render it down, and it took well over an hour. So I decided right then and there I'll never be doing 4K on a Mac, because yeah, I can export it in iMovie, but then the process of converting it using Handbrake just takes, for 7 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes it took in 4K. So it was a 4K to 4K render from H.264 to H.265. Not worth it. Now, I've got to experiment more with Kdenlive. You can use proxy clips, and I have tried to do that one time, but when I did the proxy clips, I got some really strange behavior, and I'm going to have to look into that and see what the deal is. But overall, it didn't work for me, but I'm hoping it can work, because if I can get proxy clips working, I could edit in 4K right here and then render it out in H.265 and start uploading 4K, and it's viable because I only have to do one render in 4K, and I think that's totally awesome using H.265. I mean, that really is a heck of a time saver for me. So I may be doing 4K in the future here on Linux, and that's going to be my solution. I probably will never actually be using the Mac to do 4K unless I'm forced to do it, and then I would probably in that case buy Final Cut Pro. But I'm kind of a on the budget YouTuber, so to speak, so the things that I use and the tools that I use are not top of the line like you see with most YouTubers. Right now I'm talking on a Pop Voice lavalier microphone I got for 11 bucks, for example, so it sounds way better than the microphone that's on board, but you know, it works great, and those are the kind of things that I look for. So I tend to buy really nice portable systems because I go around a lot, I do things a lot, and that's what I need, and so I do that. But all the other gear that I get usually is relatively inexpensive. Not cheap, mind you, but inexpensive. That's pretty much all I've got for you today. I just thought I would show you, the basic changes I made to KDE, some of the things that I do. It does look very basic. Some people, again, they say it looks like Vista, but hey, I like it. I really think it's attractive. I like how the screen looks. I like the widgets up here in the corner. Haven't quite figured out why the Videos app has different widgets. The only thing I can think of is it's really made for GNOME. Don't really know. Normally I don't use this particular video app anyways. I use VLC. So that's usually what I do. I also wanted to mention one last thing. Forgot all about this. I like to set up my favorites here. So kind of like the side toolbar that you have in GNOME. I have all my favorites here, and these are things that I will use quite often on a regular basis, so I just stick them all here, and it works really well for me. So you really can do a lot of tweaks with KDE. There's just a ton of stuff that you can do. It really depends what your needs are. But I feel like KDE can give me everything that I need, and even though I have that new MacBook, I still prefer Linux, mainly because I don't have to pay anything. I can get all these applications that I need for free, and they do what I need them to do, and I really like the environment. I know many people complain about the environment, and there's some good reasons that they do, gaming being the chief among them. But I almost never do gaming, so when I do want to do any gaming, I'll just switch over to Windows. I have this system set up as a dual boot, and I'll just boot into Windows and do things from there. So that's my take on why I'm using Linux, and why, quite frankly, I think it's the environment for me. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to go ahead and edit this one up really quick and get it uploaded. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you're doing in Linux. If you're not, I understand completely. There are plenty of reasons why somebody might want to use Windows, and plenty of reasons why somebody might want to use a Mac. I have two of them, so I completely understand. I just always find myself coming back to Linux and saying, wow, this all works really well, and it does what I need it to do, and it works for me. Hope you have a good day, and hope you have a good weekend coming up, and I'll see you next time on Fast Gadgets.